When I married Rebecca, I thought we had something real, something solid. I was the kind of man who believed in loyalty, in putting family first. I'd wake up early every morning, make sure the house was in order, and head to work knowing that everything back home was as it should be. But, as I've come to realize, stability means nothing when you're the only one trying to keep things steady. It was a Friday night when everything changed. Rebecca had been acting distant for a few weeks, but I chalked it up to stress. Work, life, who knows? People have their moments. But then she suggested something that took me by surprise. Why don't we go out tonight? Just the two of us, for a nice dinner, she said, her voice sweet but with an edge I couldn't quite place. She'd always been the type to know what she wanted and how to get it. That night, I was clueless about the storm that was coming. I agreed, of course. Why wouldn't I? A quiet dinner with my wife sounded like a good way to reconnect. We hadn't done anything like that in months, and maybe it was just what we needed. So, I put on my best shirt, and we headed to one of her favorite restaurants, a small Italian place downtown. Dinner was nice. Almost too nice. Rebecca was more talkative than she had been in weeks, laughing at old jokes, touching my hand across the table. I found myself relaxing, thinking maybe we were finally getting back on track. But when dessert came, she gave me this look, a mischievous grin that sent a cold shiver down my spine. I have a surprise for you when we get home, she whispered, leaning close as if it were a secret. At the time, I smiled back, not knowing how wrong everything was about to go. When we got back to the house, I noticed a small bag sitting on the kitchen counter. Rebecca smiled and nodded toward it. That's for later, she said, her voice dripping with excitement. But first, why don't we have a drink? I grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge and sat down on the couch, trying to shake off the weird feeling building in the pit of my stomach. Rebecca was pacing the room, clearly waiting for something. Her energy was off, too high, too eager. Then she pulled out the contents of the bag, a leather whip, a blindfold, and a coil of rope. My first reaction was to laugh it off, thinking it was some kind of joke. We weren't the type to get into this sort of thing. But her expression told me she wasn't kidding. You said you wanted to try something new, she said, her eyes locking with mine. I thought this might spice things up. The unease I had been feeling earlier started to turn into something more, something darker. But I didn't stop her. Maybe I was just naive, or maybe I still believed she was doing this for us, for me. So, I played along. I let her blindfold me, I let her tie me to the chair, and I waited for whatever game she had planned. But then she did something I'll never forget. As soon as I was tied up, she left the room. I could hear her footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving toward the front door. Panic started to set in. I pulled against the ropes, but she had done a good job. I couldn't move. And then I heard her voice, muffled but clear enough. She was calling someone inside. The door creaked open, and footsteps, heavier than hers, entered the house. My heart was pounding, and I was sweating through my shirt. Every muscle in my body tensed, but I couldn't see anything. All I heard was a low chuckle, followed by Rebecca's voice, sweet and seductive. This is your surprise, she said, her voice dangerously close to my ear now. I was frozen, helpless, as I felt the presence of someone else in the room. Then, Rebecca's hands were on me, but not in the way I had expected. She wasn't pulling me closer, wasn't trying to involve me. Instead, I could hear her moving toward the other person, hear the soft sounds of them kissing. My mind raced. What the hell was happening? I shouted her name, trying to break free, but the ropes held tight. And then, the sounds got worse. Heavy breathing, moans, sounds that were too intimate, too raw. My wife was with someone else, right there in front of me, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. I don't know how long it went on. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time lost all meaning as I struggled in vain against the ropes. My anger boiled over, turning into rage, but I was powerless to stop any of it. Rebecca, the woman I thought I knew, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Eventually, the other man left. His footsteps faded, and I heard the front door click shut. I expected Rebecca to come over, to release me from the chair, but she didn't. Not right away. She let me sit there, tied up and blindfolded, while she moved around the house, humming softly to herself. When she finally untied me, it was like nothing had happened. She was calm, collected, as if she hadn't just shattered everything between us. Why? I demanded, my voice hoarse from screaming. Rebecca didn't flinch. She just stared at me, her expression cold. Because I wanted you to know how small you really are. You're just convenient. I don't love you, I never did. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Every ounce of anger and pain I had felt in the past hour exploded all at once. You're insane. I shouted, grabbing my jacket from the floor. I'm done with this, with you. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me, but her words followed me into the night. I had been living a lie, and now that lie was tearing me. I drove aimlessly that night, the dark streets blurring together as my mind raced with a mix of fury and disbelief. How could she do this to me? The memories of our life together played in my head like a broken record, birthdays, anniversaries, all those small moments I thought meant something. Now, it felt like every memory was a lie, a sick joke I hadn't been let in on until now. I pulled over at a 24-hour diner a few miles out of town. It was the kind of place you only go to when you don't know where else to be. The neon lights buzzed above the empty parking lot, flickering like my thoughts. I slumped into a booth near the back, staring blankly at the menu but not really seeing it. "What can I get you?" a waitress asked, her voice tired but polite. "Just coffee," I muttered, barely looking up. She brought it over quickly, sensing that I wasn't in the mood for small talk. As I stared into the black liquid, I felt my anger cooling, turning into something worse, despair. It wasn't just the betrayal that was eating at me. It was the way she had done it, the way she had planned it. She had wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel powerless. The door chimed, and a group of late-night regulars shuffled in, laughing and talking loudly. I looked up, watching them for a moment, wondering if any of them knew what it was like to have their entire world ripped apart in a single night. Probably not. They seemed too carefree, too oblivious to the kind of pain that was gnawing at me. I sat there for hours, the coffee growing cold in front of me, until the sun started creeping up over the horizon. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, staring at the screen. 3 missed calls from Rebecca. I didn't answer any of them. What was there to say? Instead, I dialed a different number. "Mike? It's me. Can we meet?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike had been my closest friend since college. If there was anyone I could trust, it was him. I didn't know what I expected from him, maybe some kind of clarity or just a chance to get this mess out of my head. "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" Mike's voice sounded groggy but concerned. "I'll explain when I see you," I replied, not wanting to spill everything over the phone. We met at the park later that morning, sitting on a bench near the lake where we used to fish as kids. Mike looked at me, his brow furrowed in concern. "You look like hell, man. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. Saying it out loud felt like reliving the nightmare all over again. "Rebecca, I trailed off, unsure of how to even begin. "What? What did she do?" Mike pressed, his eyes narrowing. "She brought another man into our house last night," I said, the bitterness coating my words. "Tied me up, made me watch, like it was some sick game." Mike's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. "You're kidding me," he finally muttered, but I could tell he knew I wasn't. I shook my head. No, Mike. I wish I was. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of what I had said sinking in. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head in disbelief. What the hell, man? How could she? I don't even know what to say, he finally said, his voice thick with anger on my behalf. I don't know either, I replied, my own voice sounding hollow. But it gets worse. She told me she never loved me. That I was just convenient for her. Mike clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. That's messed up. She's messed up. I know, I muttered, the anger flaring up again. What are you gonna do? He asked, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on mine. I don't know. I left, obviously. I can't go back. But I need everyone to know. I can't just let her walk away from this without consequences. She can't just destroy my life like this and get away with it. Mike nodded slowly. I get it, man. You need to expose her for what she did. The idea was already growing in my mind. Rebecca had built this image of herself as the perfect wife, always friendly and charming. People loved her. But they didn't know the real her, the woman who would betray her husband and laugh while doing it. They needed to know. I need to find out more, I said, my voice steadying as the plan started forming in my head. There's more to this. It felt too planned, too calculated. I want to know if this was a one-time thing or if she's been seeing this guy for a while. Mike nodded again, more firmly this time. I can help with that. I know a guy, private investigator. He's good at digging up dirt. The mention of a private investigator made me hesitate for a second. It felt extreme, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't in the mood to be cautious anymore. Yeah, let's do it, I agreed, feeling a flicker of determination cut through the fog of confusion in my mind. Mike pulled out his phone and made a quick call, setting up a meeting for later that afternoon. We'll figure this out, man. You're not alone in this. I nodded, appreciating his support more than I could express at that moment. By the time I met with the private investigator, a gruff man named Scott, my resolve had solidified. I wanted answers. I needed them. He didn't ask many questions. Just took down the details I provided, nodded a few times, and said he'd start digging into Rebecca's life, her phone records, everything. As we sat in his dimly lit office, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time in hours. Scott assured me he'd find out the truth, and I believed him. But as I drove home, back to the empty house that Rebecca and I had shared for years, that calm quickly faded. The quiet of the place felt suffocating. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall was a reminder of what my life had been before last night, before she shattered it. The thought of walking through the door, of seeing her there again, made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't face her, not yet. So I stayed in the car, staring at the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Eventually, I made the decision I had been avoiding. I wasn't going to confront her, not until I had the full truth. I wasn't going to scream or break things. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Instead, I called Mike again, asking if I could crash at his place for a few days. He didn't hesitate to say yes. I packed a small bag and left without stepping foot inside the house. As I drove away, I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a blur. I stayed at Mike's place, trying to keep myself busy, but my mind kept circling back to Rebecca. I was desperate for answers, hoping the private investigator, Scott, would find something that could explain how everything had gone so wrong. Mike was there for me, doing his best to distract me with beers and late-night video games, but nothing could keep me from thinking about her. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over again in my head, the moment she tied me up, the moment she called him inside, the sound of their laughter as if I didn't even exist. 2 days after Scott had started his investigation, I got the call. I had been sitting in Mike's living room, staring blankly at the TV, when my phone buzzed. I practically lunged for it, my heart racing as Scott's gruff voice came through the line. "I've got some information for you." "It's not good," he said, his voice low and cautious. I swallowed hard, bracing myself. "Tell me everything." Scott didn't waste time sugarcoating anything. "She's been seeing this guy for months. His name's Trevor, works as a personal trainer at a gym downtown. They've been meeting up at hotels, mostly when you were at work. It's not just a one-time thing, Jack. This has been going on for a while." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Months. She had been cheating on me for months, and I had no idea. How could I have been so blind? "I've got phone records, text messages, and pictures to back it up," Scott continued. "I'll send everything over to you. But I've got to warn you, it's ugly. She's not just cheating, she's been talking about you behind your back. Telling him that you're weak, that you're just some placeholder in her life." His words felt like a punch to the gut. I had expected betrayal, but this was a level of cruelty I hadn't anticipated. "Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it," I muttered, my voice shaky. "Take care of yourself, Jack," he said before hanging up. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to process everything. My hands were trembling as I opened the files Scott had sent over. There it was, proof. Text messages between Rebecca and Trevor, detailing their plans, their little rendezvous, their feelings about me. There were photos too, Rebecca, smiling and happy in ways she hadn't been with me for a long time, wrapped around Trevor like he was the center of her universe. The worst part wasn't even the physical betrayal, it was the way she talked about me. She called me a fool, said I was boring, and that I was too trusting. She said she wanted excitement, something I couldn't give her. And Trevor, the guy who'd walked into my house and destroyed my life, had the nerve to laugh at my expense. The two of them had made me into a joke, something to mock in their secret world. I felt the anger rising inside me, hotter than ever before. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was humiliation. She had planned this for months, all while pretending to be the loving wife. She had used me. Mike walked into the room, seeing the look on my face. "What's up, man? You hear from Scott?" I handed him the phone, letting him read the messages for himself. His face darkened as he scrolled through the texts and photos, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's messed up," he muttered, handing the phone back to me. "She's not just cheating, she's treating you like some kind of joke." "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "I'm not going to let her get away with it." Mike nodded, his expression serious. "What's the plan?" I had been thinking about it all night, even before I got the call from Scott. I wasn't the kind of guy to just sit back and let someone destroy my life. I needed to make sure everyone knew what Rebecca had done. I needed to make her face the consequences of her actions. "I'm going to tell everyone," I said, my voice steady. "Her friends, her family, everyone. I want them all to know who she really is." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? It could get messy." "I don't care. She deserves it." Mike hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, man. I'm with you. Whatever you need." The next day, I started putting my plan into action. I sent the evidence I had to a few of Rebecca's closest friends, people who had always thought of her as this perfect, charming woman. I sent them the texts, the pictures, everything. I wanted them to see the real Rebecca, the woman who had lied and cheated and humiliated me. The responses started rolling in within hours. Shock, disbelief, anger. Some of them couldn't believe it at first. But when they saw the proof, there was no denying it. Word spread quickly, and soon enough, Rebecca's entire social circle knew the truth. I wasn't done there. I reached out to her parents, sent them the same files. I knew it would devastate them, but I couldn't bring myself to care. They had always treated me like family, and I figured they deserved to know what their daughter had been up to. By the end of the day, Rebecca's world was unraveling. I heard through the grapevine that she had been bombarded with calls and messages from her friends and family, all of them demanding answers. She had nowhere to hide. That evening, I got a call from her. My phone buzzed, and I stared at her name on the screen for a moment before answering. "What do you want, Rebecca?" I asked, my voice cold and detached. "How could you do this?" she shouted, her voice laced with anger and panic. "You told everyone. My parents, my friends, why would you do that?" "Because you deserved it," I replied, my tone steady. "You humiliated me, Rebecca. You used me, lied to me, cheated on me, and then you have the audacity to be angry because I told people the truth. You did this to yourself." She fell silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I wanted more excitement, Jack. I was bored. I'm sorry." I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and hollow. "You're sorry? That's all you have to say? I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I cut her off, my voice sharper now. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Rebecca. You wanted to hurt me. You wanted to break me, to make me feel small. Well, congratulations. You did it." There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. "Please, Jack. I didn't mean for it to end like this." "It's over, Rebecca," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done with you. I'm moving on." "Wait, can we just—" I hung up before she could finish her sentence. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, any more apologies that meant nothing. I had made my decision. I was done being her fool. It was time to move on with my life. I stayed at Mike's for another few days, letting things settle down. Rebecca had tried calling me a few more times, but I ignored every one of them. I didn't need to hear her voice anymore. She had already said everything I needed to know. Scott had done his job well. He had given me the truth, and I had used it to break free. The Rebecca I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't even recognize. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now she was paying the price. But despite everything, I still felt this deep ache in my chest. The kind of pain that doesn't just go away overnight. The kind that stays with you, reminding you of what you lost, even if what you lost wasn't worth keeping in the first place. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just hurt because of what they did. It hurts because it forces you to question everything you thought you knew, everything you believed in. I had believed in Rebecca, in our marriage, and now it was all gone. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. By the time I packed my things and headed back to the house, I was ready to face Rebecca. I hadn't spoken to her in days, ignoring every attempt she made to contact me. The messages piled up on my phone, pleas, apologies, excuses, but I didn't read a single one. What could she say to make any of this better? Nothing. As I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. The house felt different now. What used to be a place of comfort had turned into a battleground, a reminder of all the lies that had been living there with me. I had no idea what to expect when I walked through the front door, but I wasn't going to let her take any more power over me. The living room was empty, quiet. I dropped my bag by the door, took a deep breath, and headed upstairs. Rebecca was sitting on the edge of our bed, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face filled with a mix of fear and regret. "Jack," she started, her voice weak. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, wiping at her eyes. "I know I've hurt you. I know I messed everything up, and I'm sorry. I never should have done any of it. You just what? I cut her off, my voice cold. Wanted excitement. Wanted something different. You didn't just cheat, Rebecca. You didn't just lie. You humiliated me. You planned to humiliate me. She flinched at my words, her hands shaking in her lap. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't thinking. That's not true, and you know it, I shot back, my anger rising again. You planned this. You planned to tie me up, to bring that guy into our house, and you thought it would be fun to make me watch. Don't stand there and tell me you weren't thinking. She lowered her head, unable to look me in the eye. I was selfish, Jack. I was stupid. That's putting it lightly. There was a long silence between us, the air thick with tension. Rebecca's shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything she'd done was finally hitting her. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You can't, I replied, my voice steady. There's no fixing this. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide and filled with desperation. But I love you, Jack. I made a mistake, but I love you. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head, feeling a bitter laugh escape my lips. Love? You call this love? If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me like that. I know, she said quickly, standing up and stepping toward me. But I was confused. I didn't know how to talk to you about what I was feeling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I took a step back, not wanting her to come any closer. Rebecca, I don't care about your excuses. You had choices. You could have talked to me, you could have left me if you were unhappy. But you chose this. Tears streamed down her face, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the way she had laughed with Trevor about me. Any sympathy I had was crushed beneath the weight of that memory. I can change, she pleaded. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just, don't leave me. Please. I stared at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching this whole scene from outside my body. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person I had married. Or maybe she was, and I had just never seen her for who she really was. I already left, Rebecca, I said quietly. I left the moment you brought him into our home. She broke down completely then, sinking to the floor as sobs racked her body. It was a pitiful sight, but it didn't move me. I had already made up my mind. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice firm. I'll give you your half of the house, the car, whatever. I don't care. I just want out. She looked up at me through her tears, her face crumpling in despair. No, Jack, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling, we can. I'm done, Rebecca. There's no fixing this. She let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. I turned away, unable to watch her fall apart any longer. It was over. There was nothing left to say. I left the house that night, staying at a motel on the outskirts of town. The silence was deafening, but it felt better than the lies I had been living in for months. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, feeling a strange sense of freedom creeping in. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next few days, I focused on the legalities, meeting with my lawyer, preparing the divorce papers, figuring out what to do with the house. Rebecca had tried calling me a few more times, but I ignored them. I wasn't interested in hearing her pleas anymore. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Mike had been a solid rock through all of it, helping me with the logistics, offering support when I needed it. But I could tell he was worried about me. I wasn't sleeping much, wasn't eating well. The weight of the betrayal was still sitting heavy on my chest, but I knew I had to push through it. One afternoon, Mike invited me over for beers, and I reluctantly agreed. It was better than sitting alone in the motel, stewing in my thoughts. As we sat on his porch, beers in hand, he finally brought up the elephant in the room. "How are you really doing, man?" Mike asked, his eyes searching mine. I shrugged, taking a swig of beer. "I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to get through it." "Yeah, but you don't seem like you're getting through it," he said, his tone gentle. "I mean, this is a lot to deal with. You don't have to pretend like it's all okay." I let out a long sigh, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what to feel anymore. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but mostly, I just feel numb. Like I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened. Mike nodded, leaning back in his chair. "That's normal, man. Anyone in your situation would feel the same way. But don't let it eat you up. You gotta move on from this." I knew he was right, but moving on felt impossible at that moment. How do you move on from something that shatters everything you believed in? "I don't know how to," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I feel like I'm stuck in this loop, replaying everything over and over in my head. What she did, what I should have done differently, it's like it never ends." "You can't blame yourself for this, Jack," Mike said firmly. "She's the one who made those choices, not you. You did everything you could." "I thought I knew her," I whispered, the pain bubbling to the surface again. "But I didn't. I didn't know her at all." Mike didn't say anything for a moment, just let the silence hang between us. Then he leaned forward, setting his beer down on the table. "Look, man. You're a good guy. You're honest, you care about people, and you don't deserve what happened to you. But you gotta stop beating yourself up over it. She's not worth that." I looked at him, appreciating his words even though they didn't take the pain away. But he was right. Rebecca wasn't worth my self-destruction. She had already taken so much from me, and I couldn't let her take any more. That night, back at the motel, I finally let myself feel something other than anger. I let the sadness wash over me, let the tears fall as I sat there in the dark, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. It wasn't just Rebecca, it was the life I thought we were building, the future I had envisioned. But as the tears dried, a new resolve settled in. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let this be the thing that broke me. I had survived the worst of it. Now, it was time to rebuild. The following weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and endless phone calls from Rebecca that I refused to answer. It was strange how quickly our lives had become a tangled mess of legalities. Divorce was something I never thought I'd face, but here I was, in the middle of it, trying to stay afloat while the wreckage of my marriage crumbled around me. Every time my phone buzzed, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I knew it would either be another message from Rebecca or some update from my lawyer. Rebecca's texts had gone from angry rants to desperate pleas, begging me to reconsider. The shift was jarring, but none of it moved me anymore. I was done. I spent most of my time trying to distract myself. Work helped, and Mike kept me grounded, but the nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in the small bed at the motel, my mind drifting back to that night. The night everything had changed. It was like a ghost haunting me, refusing to let me move on. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, I finally gave in and checked my phone. Rebecca had sent another long message, but this one was different. Instead of asking me to come back or apologizing, she tried to justify herself. "You don't understand, Jack. I needed something more. Our life was boring. You were never exciting. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but I had to do something for myself for once." I stared at the message, feeling a fresh wave of anger boil up. How could she justify what she did? How could she make it sound like it was my fault for not being enough? I wanted to reply, to scream at her through the screen, but I didn't. Instead, I deleted the message and tossed my phone across the bed. She wasn't worth the energy. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight that had been pressing down on me was starting to lift. Maybe it was the realization that Rebecca's justifications didn't matter, or maybe it was the exhaustion of feeling hurt for so long. Either way, I knew I needed to start taking real steps toward healing. The first step was moving out of the motel. I couldn't stay there forever. Mike had offered his place, but I needed my own space, somewhere I could start fresh. So I rented a small apartment on the edge of town, just big enough for me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I started filling it with things that made it feel like home: books, a comfortable couch, a few pieces of art. It was simple, but it was a beginning. As I unpacked the last box, a feeling of relief washed over me. This was my space. Rebecca wasn't part of it. This was where I would start rebuilding. A week later, the divorce was finalized. It happened quicker than I expected, but that didn't make it any less painful. I stood in front of the courthouse with the official papers in my hand, staring at the words that marked the end of everything. I thought I'd feel some kind of satisfaction, some sense of closure, but all I felt was numbness. The weight of the finality settled in, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do with myself. Mike met me at a bar that night, buying me a drink to toast the end of my marriage. He tried to keep things light, cracking jokes and making sure I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts, but I could tell he was worried. "You all right, man?" he asked after a while, his eyes serious for the first time that night. "I don't know," I admitted, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "I guess I should feel relieved, but I just feel empty." Mike nodded, taking a sip of his own drink. "That's normal. You've been through hell, Jack. It's gonna take time." "I know," I sighed. "It's just. I thought I'd feel better once it was over. But it still feels like something's missing." "Give it time," Mike said, his voice firm. "You'll get there. You're already doing better than you think." I appreciated his words, but it was hard to believe them in the moment. The truth was, I didn't know who I was without Rebecca. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being her husband, in building a life with her. Now that she was gone, I wasn't sure what was left of me. Over the next few months, things slowly started to change. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects, keeping busy to distract myself. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. It felt good to focus on myself for once, to do things that made me feel alive instead of just going through the motions. I also reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I had been too wrapped up in my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The nights weren't as lonely anymore. I still thought about Rebecca from time to time, but the sharp pain of betrayal had dulled into a distant ache. It didn't consume me like it used to. I was starting to move on. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I saw a notification pop up. It was an email from Scott, the private investigator. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen before I opened it. Inside was a final report. I hadn't asked for anything else from him, but he had continued digging after the divorce, wanting to make sure I had the full picture. And there it was, everything. More texts between Rebecca and Trevor, more details about their meetings, and the kicker, a plan to move in together. She hadn't just been bored, she had been planning her escape from our marriage for months. I closed the email, feeling a strange sense of closure. The final puzzle piece had fallen into place. Rebecca had never intended to stay with me. I was nothing more than a convenient stepping stone in her life. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt truly free. It's strange how life works. Sometimes, it takes the worst kind of betrayal to make you realize what you're really worth. I had spent so much time thinking I wasn't enough for Rebecca, that I had failed somehow, but the truth was, she wasn't enough for me. The wounds were still there, and they would probably always be there, in some form. But they didn't control me anymore. They were just part of my story, one chapter in a much bigger book. As I sat there in the quiet of my new apartment, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't numb. I was ready to move on.